Okay, so we're up to the third of the five measures in personality, the one I call social priorities. What are social priorities? Well, in the previous section, we talked about character type. And character type is the part of your personality that tells you who has needs. Do you have needs yourself? Are they coming from inside you, in which you're in a me state? Are these needs coming from outside you, the needs of others, in which case you're in a you state? Okay, so you sense now where the needs that are coming from. Um, Now the next thing that happens in personality is that you determine what kind of needs these needs are. Um, and we have four broad categories of needs. Each of these categories develops at some point in the first 4 years of life, and by four, all four are in your personality, and in addition, the four are prioritized. They are in an order that is normal for your personality. Okay. Um, so, what exactly are the four categories? The simple way that I speak about them is that the first category is comfort, the second category is neatness, the third category is understanding, and the fourth category is freedom. And each of these categories has to do with something that babies master in that first 4 years. So with comfort, the baby has to master their sensations. Babies are born with undifferentiated sensations in large part, meaning that they don't have a sense that hearing is separate from smelling, is separate from tasting, and so on. They overlap. Um, and so in the first 6 months, the baby learns to master their use of these five senses. And comfort, um, feeling comfortable sensory-wise, is this particular category of needs. The time it runs is about from birth to about 6 months old. And that 6 month line is roughly the timing of when we develop depth perception. And so while this continues to develop in a minor way, after that, by 6 months old, this is our uh, mastered category of needs. Um, at this point, since we have mastered our ability to sense things, and things being the key word, um, we begin to explore beyond our own sensations and out into the world. And at this point, we don't even have a sense that there is an out in the world versus us, because at this point, even our fingers and toes are things that we explore. So, what are we trying to master in this period? Well, we're trying to master the arrangement of the things that we sense, our ability to affect our environment in some sense. So we explore everything that we can reach, or we try everything that we can see. And in fact, this is a strong motivation for us to become a lot more mobile, to learn to crawl, to learn to walk, and so on, because we want to reach these things that we want to explore and, in a sense, arrange in our environment. Okay, so I call this category of need neatness, not because babies are neat, no, not usually, but because it is the easiest way to describe this category of need, which could also be called organization or creating a system. Um, okay. The third category of needs is titled understanding, and we could say that the mastery that occurs in this time period, which is about from 1 year to about 2 years old, in this time, the baby is mastering the meanings, assigning meanings, and understanding the meanings of the things it has learned to sense. So if you look back over the three categories so far, you see in the first 6 months we learn to use our five senses. And then in the second 6 months, from 6 months to a year, we use that mastery to explore the things that we sense, to move them around, to arrange them. In the time from 1 year old to 2 years old, we then assign meanings to these things that we sense. And this changes at somewhere around 2 years old, when we have spent this first 2 years of our life mastering sensation, the arrangement of the things we sense, and the meaning of the things we sense, and we're tired of this. And so we rebel, and we now want to be free of needing to master anything. In fact, freedom itself, feeling free, being free from these things, is in and of itself a mastery, which many adults still struggle with. However, these masteries, these four masteries, become the four broad categories of needs that we arrange what we sense into. Okay, now the next thing to realize about this is that I've used the word priorities, and each of these can in and of itself be a priority. There has to be some way to arrange these things, and as I said, we all have all four, but they are arranged in an order, and that order is fixed by about age 4. What does this look like? Well, in order to see this, I've created a vertical column of windows, a stack of 4 windows, one on top of the other. And through these 4 windows, we would see, each of us, one of our 4 priorities. They each can only have a single occurrence of each priority, and so in a typical column, which I call a social priority tree, that tree may start at the top with understanding, and then below that it might be freedom, and then below that it might be neatness, and at the bottom perhaps comfort. Now, I've chosen this order because this happens to be the order of my social priority tree: understanding, freedom, neatness, and comfort. And we'll look at what that means in the next video, but right now we need to explore a bit further about how this works. Okay, so the thing to keep in mind here is that we can only see through one window at a time, and in a normal state of mind we see through the top window in our tree, in my case, understanding. And so whenever I feel needy, my first priority is to try and understand these needs. No surprise that I'm a theorist, and that my therapy is to teach people human nature. Okay, while we're in this state, this normal state, we sometimes drop down to the second priority in this tree, in which case the first one becomes invisible, or behind a window or a closed window or something, and we see through the second window, and the second window in my case is freedom. So I will look to understand something, and truthfully sometimes I just am banging my head against a window, almost literally, and so then I move to be free of this. That is my personal preference. And some ways this plays out in my personality is that if I am forced into a learning situation, I don't want to be there. And in fact, I am like a 2-year-old. I just rebel against it. However, if I am completely free to learn something or that I'm interested in, and the timing of it and so on is up to me, then I love learning. And what am I learning? I'm learning to understand the meaning of the things that I sense. Okay. So now I've named the upper two, and all the social priority trees actually are divided into the upper two and the lower two, the upper pair and the lower pair. And so the upper pair, what I've just described in my personality, is what I cycle between when I'm in a normal state of mind. Okay. Well, what happens when I am feeling stressed? Well, when it goes to the point where I cannot free myself of the lack of understanding, when I'm really, I just want to quit, what happens is I drop down to the bottom of my social priority tree, and that social priority in me is comfort. And so when I am at my worst, when I lose it, what I experience my needs as is the need for comfort, sensory comfort. And so what do? Well, I overeat, I oversleep, I I watch too many movies. I do all kinds of things that are attempts to get me to be more physically comfortable. And many people would actually advise, people do advise, therapists advise sometimes, well, when you're feeling really bad, go take a hot bath or this or that. Well, in truth, that doesn't help me, and in fact, it makes it worse. Because as long as I stay in that sense of my needs, comfort, I stay at the bottom of my tree. And okay, so one of the real uses for knowing your social priorities comes at this point, because if you know you're next to your bottom social priority, in my case neatness, if you go to that priority, if you do things that will satisfy that need, then you come out of that state that you get stuck in at the bottom of your tree. So in my case, when I'm feeling urges to overeat or just to sleep in half the day and things like this, I know that I have to do some small tasks that organize my life, small acts of neatness. And so if I go organize a single kitchen drawer, 5 minutes, not long, or if I take a couple things out of a closet that I've been meaning to throw away and put them in the garbage can. If I go to the post office and mail a letter that's been sitting on a desk for a couple days, or if I make a phone call that I've been putting off. Each of these things is a part of organizing my life. If I do a morning of doing these things, even if I'm in a pretty difficult space inside me, I come out of it. And as I come out of that sense of neediness at the bottom, I no longer want to overeat or oversleep. I actually begin to feel freed from that need as I move up to my upper pair and into freedom. That's what I'm feeling. And when I feel free for a little while, I actually feel free to go to what I love the most, which is understanding and learning. Okay. So that's a lot to take in. But before I go, there were two other things I want to mention. And one of the things is that the 4 priorities are, like anything in personality, can occur in extremes. In other words, if one of your social priorities is far more prominent in your experience of life than the other 3, if it's to an extreme, each of the 4 possible social priorities is associated with what I call a minority personality. And the four priorities, comfort, neatness, understanding, and freedom, the four minority personalities that they're associated with, comfort, physical sensation, is associated with autism, the classic kind of autism. Um, Neatness is associated with the OCD. Um, Understanding, the meaning of things, is associated with Asperger's. And the freedom from those three things, the freedom from needing to learn anything, is associated with ADD or ADHD. Now, please realize, when I say minority personalities, I am not referring to medical conditions. Although these labels are commonly used that way, that is not the way that I am using them. Each minority personality is associated with, in some sense, an exaggerated version of a social priority tree. And at the top of each of these minority personalities in their social priorities trees, each of those persons has one of the four priorities that really eclipses the other three. Okay, and the thing to also realize, I mentioned two things, is that these four social priorities occur, if you were to be figure it out mathematically, the permutations of four things taken four at a time. There are 24 possible unique ways that you can have those four social priorities. 24. And so all of us have one of the 24 social priority trees. And we're going to look at that in more depth in the next video.